Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson. Today we're listening to The Secrets of the Morgue, and this is a modern mummy.
You lift up the tarp, and you definitely see that there is a human body there.
I have never really seen a mummified victim before.
Lungs was not there, the intestines, even the brain, everything is gone. Who is this person? How did they die?
We need to figure out what happened, why it happened, and when it happened.
Why wasn't she missed? Wasn't she loved?
I've never seen anything quite like this.
Every murder is a mystery. But a victim's body is a sea of evidence. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound, a piece of the puzzle. The medical examiner holds the key to unlock their stories and catch a killer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
Chester is a little border town, almost to the Kansas border. It's picturesque, some rolling hills and things. It's pretty.
It's a very small town. Everybody knows everybody else's business.
Chester is the kind of place where if you were a person who locked your door and you forgot, you would totally not sweat it.
You just don't hear anything about Chester other than something positive. And this was certainly a great departure from that.
A phone call to police triggers a mystery that rocks this tight-knit town to its core.
They said, well, we've got a body that's in a garage, and we think it's been there for a while. And I believe it used to be a gas station one time.
It was just nondescript, maybe would be a good word. And yeah, it was nothing that you looked at and you thought, oh, something terrible happened there.
You open the door, and there's a tarp right behind a van.
When officers remove the tarp, they're shocked by what they find.
This body is mummified. I mean, this body has been here for a while.
It is rare to find a mummified body. First of all, the body has to be left unattended, and it has to be in the right environmental conditions.
First, detectives need to find out how the body was discovered.
Some curious neighbors were thinking about purchasing the property.
Nick and Becky Gossman live right next door.
If you are going to go into an abandoned building, you really aren't worried about finding anything, maybe an animal. You might worry, oh, maybe there's a raccoon in there or a skunk in there, but you would never in a million years worry about finding something like this.
Mick Gosman found this key in the door. They peeked in, and then they entered the house and was looking through it, and then came across this tarp.
The Gossmans claim to have no idea where the key came from, but their story is suspicious.
They had this key and access to the house, proximity to the house, knowledge of the house. You do want to make sure that they're not involved.
Sometimes a killer will insert themselves into an ongoing investigation. Part of the reason they do this is that they're trying to gather intel and figure out if the police are onto their tail.
Right away, the neighbors are grilled about the house and its occupants.
What do you know? What was your relationship with them? Did you speak with them? You take pieces from that and try to verify whatever information that they are giving you.
After checking their alibis, it's clear the Gossman's only interest is to buy the house.
Mick Osmond and his family was not involved with the body that was found.
For Detectives Kranz and Funkhauser, their next step is to identify the victim.
As we looked at the body, it was undetermined as to age or sex because the body had been there quite some time. The skin had shrunk and facial features were reduced. Those features of the body, which would normally help identify somebody, just weren't apparent. Who is this person? What's their story? How did they die?
Sometimes investigators are faced with unidentified remains that may have been in that position for months. And that's a very difficult situation for any homicide investigator because you need to know who your victim is. That's sort of ground zero. That's where you begin.
The body is moved to the morgue, where the coroner's physician, Dr. Okoye, looks for answers. Born in Nigeria, Okoye was chief medical examiner in Washington, D.C., before moving to Nebraska in 1991.
In high school, I started reading Agatha Christie novels. And I became very interested to find out why people die and if they are killed, how they were killed. The fascination is that no case is the same. Dr. Okoye, he's a unique man. He's highly educated. He's an attorney. He's a medical doctor. He's a well-known forensic pathologist. But in his heart, he's an investigator.
When we get this body out of the body bag, Dr. Okoye flips the body over, and the first thing he says is, well, this is female.
We took photograph of the general body, took measurement of the body. We noted there was not much flesh except the mummified skin.
The unusual state of the woman's remains makes it harder to identify the body and unlock the cause of death.
In mummification, the skin loses the moisture. The skin becomes dry, wrinkled, become parchment-like, thick.
Mummification is the postmortem process of both decaying and drying out at the same time. Mummification occurs only under certain conditions in which there is a dry environment that would allow for evaporation of water inside the body and leave the tissues on the bones.
Dr. Okoye uses state-of-the-art technology to get a better look at the leather-like skin.
We like to do 3D CT scan of the whole body. I want to look in before I go in.
CAT scans will help you identify problems in advance. For example, whether or not there's a projectile or bullet that is in the body that has to be located and recovered. CAT scans can also tell you whether or not there are new broken bones or old broken bones, liver disease, heart disease, any number of problems that you want to know about in advance.
You can look at the face. You can rotate the face. You can look from inside of the skull cavity. It's very detailed. I can't handle any case that is complicated without 3D CT scan.
The scan of the mummified body reveals evidence that changes the course of the investigation.
There are fractures of the face. The nasal bones were fractured, and also the sinus on the left side was fractured. There are skull fractures, one or two at the back of the head. You could see the long groove with the depressed fracture, which an implement or a weapon that could have caused that.
Dr. Okoye performs a physical examination of the skull and finds more chilling details.
You could see duct tape around the head, front, back, and then there was a plastic bag covering over the head.
The skull fractures and plastic bag paint a disturbing picture of how Jane Doe died.
It suggests that she suffered multiple blows. But why do we have a plastic bag with duct tape?
Mummification has prevented investigators from making an ID, but Dr. Okoye has proven that Jane Doe is the victim of a violent homicide.
We didn't know why the killer covered her head with a sack. Whether it was to hide her identity, or if it was to suffocate her, or it was to contain the blood that was coming out from her head, we knew it was done for a reason. The victim had gone through a horrific experience.
Residents of Chester, Nebraska are shocked that a mummified body with a crushed skull has been found in their small town, and police have few clues about the murder.
We've got some work to do. We need to get this body identified positively, and we need to figure out what happened, why it happened, and when it happened.
Detective Roger Kranz has been investigating homicides for 25 years.
My goal in life was to be a high school science teacher, but I found my way into law enforcement. I wanted to apply science to my career as much as I could. My responsibility is to ensure that I have got my facts straight, because I wanted to make sure when our case is done, that it is done right.
Investigators focus on the house. It's their only link to the mummified victim.
The house had remained empty for several years.
And the first thing I noticed is that there are quilts everywhere, covering windows, covering the doorway. I'm thinking somebody didn't like the light. There's a bed to your right when you first walk in. Then that bed turns into the kitchen, and then off the kitchen there's another bedroom. We examined the doors, we examined the windows, and we could not find any sign of forced entry into this house. There was a purse. If this house had been burglarized, somebody definitely would have taken the time to steal whatever valuables they could, because they were everywhere.
There were an awful lot of antiques in this home without a lot of other objects that would indicate that someone lived there as a family. There were numerous pieces of furniture and glassware and vases and things like that that just didn't fit in this place.
But antiques aren't the only unusual items they find inside.
It looked like there was food that had been sitting on a table forever. There was broccoli there, and it looked petrified. There was Christmas decorations up, and everything's dated 7 years or so prior. This was February 2003, and a TV guide that's sitting on the bed is December of 1997. It's like you walked into a place that time forgot, that all of a sudden people are here doing whatever they do, and instead of packing and leaving, they just disappeared. Like alien abduction or just walked off the face of the earth.
Right away, we wanted to know who were the last people to have lived at this residence.
We find some paperwork in there from the purchase of the house showing that this was purchased by John Mooney and a Janet Rousseau. The house was in Janet Rousseau's name. John Mooney's name was found on other documents.
In Chester, everyone knows everybody. But John Mooney and Janet Rousseau are a mystery.
The people that lived here said that John and Janet kept to themselves quite a bit. They were friendly, but you didn't see them a whole lot during the day.
They said they worked in antiques. People mentioned that they covered their vehicles right after they got there, and they had tarps up around part of the property. Well, I thought that was odd. People who talked with Janet, they described her as bubbly, intelligent, had a laugh that you kind of remembered. It was a very engaging laugh. People guessed that Janet was in her 40s. She was very pretty.
A picture of John and Janet emerges, frozen in time.
There's kind of two trains of thought on the couple. The people who didn't know them thought, well, maybe they're just a little bit suspicious because you don't know what they're doing here. Then other people who had interacted with them liked them, especially Janet.
But everyone in town agrees on one thing. They came and left quickly.
We speak with neighbors saying that, yes, they were there, and all of a sudden they're gone.
Police wonder when Janet and John left town and when the body was concealed in the garage.
We realize that we need to find John Mooney and Janet Rousseau to find out if they're alive.
John Mooney, there's probably 150, 200 John Mooneys in the United States. And in 2003, it was a little harder to find them than it is now.
But with Janet Rousseau, we thought that if she was missing, that there should have been a report or something out there.
Janet had not been reported missing by anyone.
The cases that frustrate investigators the most are the ones where they continue to hit walls. They've got a murder, they want to solve it, and yet they're blocked every step of the way.
While police take the hunt for John and Janet nationwide, Dr. Okoye continues his examination to ID Jane Doe.
By looking at the ossification of the bones and also looking at the sutures of the skull. When they closed, the age was estimated between 45 or 46 and 61.
The age of the bones suggests the remains could be Janet. Detectives asked Dr. Okoye to investigate when their Jane Doe died. If they can get a clear timeline, they can compare it to Janet and John's time spent living in the house.
The investigators at the scene said she weighed like 30, 40 pounds because all the moisture had left the body. So we had a pretty good idea the body had been there quite some time, but we didn't know exactly how long.
He begins by examining the mummified skin.
Mummification would have occurred in hot climates within a short time. When the temperature is hot and dry, the early postmortem decomposition changes start very fast. And in hot climates, like southern part of the US, you can have mummification within weeks.
Nebraska's dry climate with extremely hot summers speed up mummification, so the skin proves to be no help in establishing a time of death. But Dr. Okoye isn't giving up. He looks deeper. at the decomposition of the internal organs.
There are a number of stages of decomposition. One of the things that happens when you die is bacteria in your gut begin to proliferate. At room temperature, those sorts of changes become apparent after about 24 hours. When a body is placed in a cool environment, it slows down the process of decomposition. It would slow down the overgrowth of bacteria. We refrigerate bodies in the morgue for the same reason that a refrigerator is used to keep food fresh. It slows down the decaying process.
If Dr. Okoye can determine how fast or slow the organs decomposed, he may have an answer.
There were no organs left with the body.
Over time, the cells die in a process known as autolysis, and the mummy's organs dissolve.
Spleen was not there. Lungs, the intestines, and also outside the intestines. Even the brain, decomposed and autolyzed. So everything is gone. You don't have scientific evidence.
As we looked at the body, it was obviously undetermined as to, the exact time of death.
After 2 forensic tests, all Dr. Okoye can tell detectives is that Jane Doe could have been murdered months or years ago. For investigators, it's one more challenge in cracking the mystery of the mummy.
If you haven't identified the victim, you have nowhere to look other than missing person reports. And people travel all over the place. People visit other states and other cities. So that information is always fluid and always changing.
We had a mummified body, no apparent suspects. Looking back on the death cases that we investigated, I've never seen anything quite like this.
Police believe John Mooney and Janet Rousseau are linked to the murder of a mummified Jane Doe in Chester, Nebraska. But they can't track them down.
The fact that it involves people that weren't local residents of Chester. They didn't have family down there. They didn't have friends. They didn't really have a record in the community. So it made it difficult to find out where they may or may not be.
They get a lead when an old criminal record for a Janet Rousseau surfaces.
We did receive a mugshot of Janet Rousseau when she was still in her teens, and it was from the Massachusetts area that she had been arrested for some type of moral violation at the time.
The mugshot sends the detectives to Massachusetts to find her family.
It was absolutely critical to find them. Have they seen her? Have they heard from her? Do you know of this John Mooney? Was there a relationship? Just so many unanswered questions.
They track Janet's family to Boston and finally get some answers.
Fortunately, we were able to identify Janet. We were able to run down a family who had lived there.
When we got Janet positively ID'd, it enabled us to focus a little more now.
Janet is certainly an interesting woman. She was very independent.
I was able to talk to the family, and I was glad that I had the chance to do that because that human side came out. She was very intelligent. It was mainly self-taught. Maybe had some study in psychology. Became kind of a free spirit later in her life and started to travel a lot.
Janet had not been reported missing by anyone because of her kind of nomadic travels. It was not unusual to not hear from her for a long period of time. She left her family years before and then started this life with John. Traveling around the South, they were in Louisiana, Nebraska, and Kansas. They were in New Mexico.
Detectives believe that Janet is most likely their mummified Jane Doe, but they still need a way to prove it. With so much still unknown, they return to Chester to try and determine where the murder took place.
The van that was parked at the garage belonged to Jennifer Rousseau and had New Mexico license plates on it.
A forensic team scours the van looking for any link to Janet or the killer.
Was there blood tracings? Is there any type of hair? There should be hair. Everybody sheds drastically, whether they know it or not.
There was no blood in the van. We didn't find any evidence that she had been killed in the van and shed any blood there.
The team moves into the house, hoping to find evidence that the murder took place inside.
They're looking for signs of a struggle, possible weapons used, blood evidence. What they really found was an area of the house that was much cleaner than the rest of the house. Someone had gone to an effort to clean up in the large room of this basically 2-bedroom home. And there were some cleaning materials still around, some cleaners, some paper towels. There was a bucket and a mop. We're fairly certain that something had happened in that area because of the effort made to clean it up.
The question is, what is going on? What do we think? What do we know? What can we prove? It's a very big mystery because we just didn't know.
But detectives are convinced the house is the murder scene. They just need to find the proof that's hidden somewhere inside.
We've got to figure out where she was killed. And so we had asked Dr. Coy, how can we prove that this happened here? The scene had been cleaned up and had years of dust settled over the top.
The abandoned house has been frozen in time since December 1997, when Janet and John lived there. Dr. Okoye believes there is a way to link it to the murder victim. He asks Nicole Wall, a palynology expert, to join his team.
Palynology is the study of the pollen and other fine filaments or dust particles. In forensic science, it helps with location of death. It can also help with time of death, meaning seasonality or time of year.
Evidence of a murder in the house was cleaned up. But plates in the kitchen were left dirty with food. If Nicole can match pollen on the food to pollen inside the victim, it proves that she ate her last meal right there.
There's broccoli on the kitchen table. There's honey inside the kitchen. We have these things there.
Because of the fact that she was naturally mummified, soft tissue was still surrounding the body. Dry soft tissue would indicate dietary-wise perhaps what she ate. Because the inside organs, like the stomach and the intestines, broke down to some extent, we knew that the enclosed abdomen would be a good sampling spot. So we sampled from there, and we got some really good results from that stomach area. The pollen that we found is one of my favorites, the brassica pollen. It's a generalized pollen type that can be attributed to either broccoli or cauliflower.
In simple terms, what we're determining more and more is that she was killed inside this house in Chester, Nebraska.
Finding a location where the victim was killed is often a turning point in an ongoing investigation. It opens up a new realm of possibilities for investigators.
We know now for a fact that a former resident, somebody that was here, should not have been dead.
Everything points to a murder inside the house. And Janet Rousseau as the victim.
Thinking that it's probably Janet. It's probably, but that's not good enough. You've got to get her identified.
We were trying to resolve a mystery. We needed to find a cold-hearted killer.
Investigators in Nebraska believe their mummified murder victim is Janet Rousseau. But due to the bloodless state of the body, DNA may be the only way to prove it.
Trying to identify an unknown person is really critical for the investigation. Advances in DNA technology have revolutionized identification in forensic science. So now, tooth pulp can be used to answer a lot of questions for you.
But in 2003, extracting a DNA sample from teeth is a new technique.
Not everything is gone. The teeth were all in place. So we took molar teeth from the deceased for DNA analysis. And we were lucky. She contributed some chromosomes and some genes. The DNA profile was used for testing.
Investigators turned to Janet's family in Boston to make the comparison.
We were able to get a sample from her family,
which ultimately matched up to her DNA and led us to identify her as Janet Rousseau.
So now it's 100%. We know it's her.
Lost and abandoned for years, detectives want to talk to the last person to see Janet alive.
The mission now that we've got Janet identified, we need to find John, because the last that we knew from speaking with the townspeople and from the documents we found inside the house, they were together last that we were aware of.
But tracking John Mooney isn't easy. No one's seen him in years.
Finding John was the dilemma. He was a tough man to find. Number one, is he still alive? And what does he know or what can he tell us about Janet?
Hoping to get a lead on John's whereabouts, detectives dive into Chester's town records.
We're finding out that John Mooney is paying taxes on this house for this entire time that they're not there.
I think the taxes on that house were $80 or $90 a year, something like that. It wasn't very much money.
Following his tax records, John Mooney is traced to California.
Roger Kranz and I jumped on an airplane and flew to Oceanside, and we went and knocked on John's door. And we found him at an apartment there in Oceanside, living with his wife, Tony. Our goal was to find out what happened and how could we verify that he wasn't involved. If John Mooney didn't kill Janet Rousseau, we had a real mystery because there were no other suspects. There were no other people involved in her life that we knew of.
John tells the detectives that after he and Janet split up, he never heard from her again.
He denied really knowing anything. It had been a long time ago. He told us that he had dropped Janet off at a truck stop in Kansas and that she wanted to go back to Cape Cod, and that was the last he'd seen her. That was going to be a real problem for us. You know, there are probably 80 truck stops within 200 miles of Kansas. We knew the chances of anybody remembering these two people was slim to none.
Detectives push hard for more details, and John finally opens up, telling them his version of his relationship with Janet.
According to John, he was being quote unquote treated for depression by Janet, who and John's description was a knowledgeable psychiatrist. John would be hit on the head for depression, for his alcoholism, for just John not being the perfect John that Janet wanted.
If the person you're interviewing has mental health issues or substance abuse issues, this changes the dynamic of the interview. You can't take everything at face value because you don't understand what's going on in their minds and what stresses they are encountering at that particular time. So it's absolutely vital that everything they say be confirmed or corroborated.
He said she was beating him and he took it. And not only was she beating him to correct his behavior, she was billing him for the hours she spent doing it. She would make him sign an IOU to Janet Brousseau for 1 hour of psychotherapy treatment. So not only did she have physical control, she also controlled his money, which I think was another driving force in him saying that he'd had enough and he was going to end it on his terms.
Detectives quickly realize that John's shocking story is turning into a confession.
He denied having anything to do with it at first, but as the interview went on, Mark said something to the effect of, so what'd you do, just grab a tire iron or something? And the answer was, well, yeah, it was a crowbar.
Detectives from the Nebraska State Patrol have tracked down John Mooney, and he's admitted to the killing of Janet Brousseau.
John told us that she regularly would crack him in the head, and she did that to correct his behavior.
They said that he told her, stop it, knocked this off, walked away, and that she continued to pursue him. And John said that he picked up the crowbar and that he had struck her in the face and that she fell. And that while she was on the ground, he hit her a second time. But while she was on the floor, he took a plastic bag, white plastic bag, put it over her head because he didn't want her looking at him. He said he sat on Janet's bed, smoked some cigarettes, and then decided to move her to the garage. He put a tarp over her, cleaned up the kitchen, and left the house in Chester the next morning.
John confirms that he killed Janet in 1997, 6 years earlier.
At the conclusion of our interview with him, he was arrested for the murder of Janet Brousseau.
Despite his detailed confession, John changes his story after his arrest.
Initially, he was charged with first-degree murder, and he pled not guilty to that. And he was started presenting a defense, let's throw out the confession.
Sometimes an offender will say that they did this crime in self-defense, and this is a way to mitigate their responsibility in the killing.
John claims he only hit Janet to protect himself.
Self-defense is a very difficult defense to run in any trial. I had to do what I did because I feared for my own safety. I feared for my own life. But there's always things to look for to defeat that defense. You have to look at the victim, and you have to look at the injuries to the victim, differences in size, differences in motivations. All of these things play in to whether self-defense is even a viable defense.
Detectives believe John Mooney planned to kill Janet, and his story of self-defense is a lie. To prove it, they turn to Dr. Okoye.
You have to use the data you got collected when you were doing the medical investigation and doing the autopsy. I consider causation to be important, and you have to have rational basis for saying anything you say. And it's definitely a homicide. Look at, she has multiple blunt force trauma to the head at the back. And the strike in the back of the head will be devastating and debilitating to her. And she will fall. But falling does not give you the fractures of the face that she got, because those are due to blunt force traumatic injuries. Now, after that, you have the plastic bag, and then the duct tape. It suggests that he wanted to make sure that she dies. That is, after she suffered the blows on the head, the cause of death was listed in the order of occurrence: blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. It's intentional. That the intent is to kill.
Based on Dr. Okoye's testimony, John Mooney pleads no contest to murder in the second degree and is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
The science was important. Without the science, we wouldn't have gone anywhere.
If it weren't for the incredible value of the scientific analysis done by Dr. Okoye and others, we wouldn't have been able to put together a good murder case. It was science that helped us identify Janet Brousseau as the victim of this crime. It was science that helped us prove that the killing occurred in Nebraska. It was science that helped us prove the cause and the manner of death.
What John Mooney did here was wrong. I feel horrible for Janet's family and for Janet herself. Nobody deserves that.
For the people in Chester, when they talked about Janet, they said, well, why wasn't she missed? Wasn't she loved? And the family was saying, what kind of place is Chester that she was there for years and no one found her? So it was good to bring those two things together. And the family really wanted to emphasize that she was loved. She was very loved.
Whoever did this had a very sadistic streak.
I knew there was something wrong with this man. I knew that he was capable of killing.
Those remains lay there long enough, and the plants grew and eventually covered the remains.
She wanted to meet people so that she could become a star.
He's definitely a sociopath. He wants what he wants, and he will go to any lengths in order to get it.
Every murder is a mystery. But a victim's body is a sea of evidence. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound, a piece of the puzzle. The medical examiner holds the key to unlock their stories and catch a killer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
It's a good community. We have sunken gardens. We have thousands of parks. Very good people.
But St. Pete, Florida has a darker side.
There are parts of South St. Pete that I wouldn't walk in. It definitely wouldn't be safe going to the ATM once the sun goes down.
One morning, during routine work along I-275. The darker side of St. Petersburg erupts into view.
The state hires crews that come along and clean the roadside. When we get torrential rains, all that water has to go somewhere. All the leaves and trash that were along the road are washed into the drainage swale.
Roadside worker was cutting grass and kicked something. Then he looked down and he found it was a skull. So he immediately calls his supervisor, who called us. We walked right across maybe 50 feet of grass and we're told, well, they found a skull here. Normally, 8 months out of the year, there would probably be a foot of water, if not more. Everything had to be right that day. The weather had to have been dry for a little while. They had to be mowing that day. All of these circumstances kind of work together. We think there's more body parts here. Now we go to the next step, which is how are we going to find out how much is out there? Unbelievable. If you've driven on 275 every day, it's 200,000 or 300,000 people going up and down the roadway, and we're 40 to 50 feet off the road.
To deal with the scene and whatever remains it may contain, Detective DeSero calls for some extra medical muscle.
When bones are found, you need a forensic anthropologist to answer a lot of questions for you. First of all, how did the bones end up there?
One of the key scientists on the case, Dr. Anthony Falsetti, is a renowned expert, having worked war crimes in Sarajevo and both the World Trade Center and Oklahoma City bombing cases.
When I was at the University of Florida, we processed over 1,000 cases in that 12-year period. Justice being served, I think, is very important to help the evolution of our species in a very broad sense. Forensic science is the practical application of all the testing and all the scholarship. It's very satisfying.
The forensic anthropologist helps to organize the excavation.
A large team is necessary to recover the remains because weather changes rapidly. In Florida, where we have heavy rains, the concern was they wanted to collect these remains quickly and accurately.
There's always a sense of urgency. Every day the scene would degrade a little bit.
It's a crime scene that looks like an archaeological dig.
When dealing with human remains, the process is the most important part because each individual item, whether it's a piece of evidence or clothing or bones, could be critical to the identification.
We're going to have to generate some type of system in order to basically grid this area off and make 4-foot sections.
We assign 2 people to each square. One person removes the debris, the other person takes the debris so that it can be screened.
We don't want to miss anything small.
Over 40 investigators work to process the area. It's a giant puzzle, but slowly a picture emerges.
As we're all working together, different things are coming up at different times. We pick up jewelry. We find some matted, nasty glob. When we wash it off, it looks like a hair extension. The acrylic nails that we found were kind of unique in the pattern, and each one of the pinkies had a fake diamond in them.
The nails, jewelry, and hair suggest the skull belongs to a woman, but investigators need to unearth more remains to know for sure.
We started to find more and more bones. Not to sound morose, but it feels good because this is something that you can work with.
Some plants were actually growing through the bones and over the bones.
So you're watching this person go from 1 bone to 2 bones to 5 to 6 to 10 to 15, and you're actually seeing a body as it's going along.
A key part of the skeleton allows the forensic team to ID the sex of the victim.
The initial examination in the field was to look at the pelvis. The pelvis is the best indicator. At puberty, the female pelvis becomes more broad. And so at that initial examination, we determined that this was a female.
For investigators, a roadside crime scene presents unique challenges.
When an investigator finds bones on the side of a highway, the problem is that quite often these victims are people that have never been reported missing before because they are living high-risk lifestyles, whether they're drug addicts or whether they're prostitutes, and it makes it difficult.
Because of her location and the fact that we don't know who she is nicknamed Jane Doe I-275.
Forensic science is the team's best hope for identifying the body and discovering what happened to Jane Doe I-275. Her bones are transported to the lab for analysis.
An inventory is made. On paper, each bone is identified as to what bone it is, what side of the body it's from. Is there any trauma or injury to that bone? And the bones were in fairly good shape for having been submerged in water seasonally. But in order to address the question of who it is, you have to establish a biological profile. You have to describe this person based on their skeletal remains.
The forensic anthropologist studies the bones for key indicators that could help identify the woman.
Up until about age 25, various parts of our skeleton are constantly changing. At the ends of the clavicle stop growing around age 21. In this instance, the ends of the clavicles had yet to finish fusing. And then you can look at the teeth. We have 6-year molars, 12-year molars, and our wisdom teeth. The third molar was erupted.
A final clue about Jane Doe's ethnicity helps round out her profile.
The skull was measured in details to capture the size and shape of the skull. The determination of ancestry was made as Europe.
Police now have a basic profile of the victim. Female, age 18 to 20, of medium height, and European descent. But it's not a lot to go on.
You have a body with no name. You have to find out who that person is before you can go forward. How can I solve this puzzle? Because until you know who, it's very hard to determine why this happened or who else may have been involved.
In the United States, there are thousands of missing women who are found later along the sides of highways. A disproportionate amount of these women are from marginalized communities that don't have the best relationship with police and often don't have ongoing contacts with family members and friends who can speak to their whereabouts.
It's kind of a phenomenon, the number of women that go missing each year. So you read about people who go on for 10 or 15 or 20 years, always worried about what happened. They never found my daughter.
It will be an uphill battle, but Detective DeCero is determined to find justice for Jane Doe I-275.
I find it rewarding to be that last voice to the victim and to give some kind of closure to the family. Some families go years and years and years without finally being able to put their thoughts of that person in a good way.
Investigators work with the only lead they have, the bones.
In this case, there was a reconstruction that was made. When an artist is making a reconstruction, they take measurements that have been defined by anthropologists at certain anatomical landmarks of the skulls. The chin, the base of the nose, the cheekbones. But the artist will build their reconstruction around those known anatomical points.
Facial reconstruction is often considered a means by which to attract the public's attention, and it is a way to generate leads.
The hope is that a reconstruction will allow friends or family to come forward. But there's always a risk of inaccurate details resulting in false leads.
Facial reconstruction can be fantastic. It can also be a hindrance due to the fact that it's in the eye of the beholder and what they intend to do.
Police often have to sift through hundreds, if not thousands, of these anonymous tips, which can send them into multiple different directions and ultimately delay an investigation.
The tips are slow at first, but they continue. As they start to go through, it's a lot of, I think it's my cousin, I think it's my aunt, I think it's a young lady that I used to know. And you get more and more of that from the community. Every one of the tips has to be investigated. So we were calling family members back, trying to see what we could do, just get any lead up on who this young lady was.
In order to narrow their search, detectives need to know how long Jane Doe has been dead.
There's definitely a color variation in the bones. So we've got to estimate how long would it take in the state of Florida for somebody to totally decompose and then have the ability to have the bones then start to bleach.
The body was put in this relatively shallow marsh, but just enough to cover the body up. The fact that it was buried was just the effect of the natural environment. So that gives us some idea of the amount of time that passed.
Taking into account the condition of the remains, the medical examiner calculates when the woman was killed.
The original time of death was 3 to 5 years. That's a time frame on how far back we should be looking.
It's a timeline that could link these remains to a famous missing persons case. Investigators in St. Petersburg consider if Jane Doe I-275 could be Tiffany Sessions, who has been missing since 1989.
Tiffany Sessions was a University of Florida student who went out for her evening walk and never came back, ever.
All kinds of theories abound. Every once in a while somebody would come forth and say they knew something about it. Could not find her.
The mystery of her disappearance put Tiffany Sessions on every investigator's radar.
Tiffany Sessions. It always comes up when there's a young woman's body found.
The case is so well known, the medical examiner can quickly access Tiffany's medical records and examine her dental x-rays.
We were able to eliminate the case from I-275 as being Tiffany Sessions by comparing the dental records that we had of Tiffany Sessions to the dentition of the skull.
With few leads on an ID, police considered connections to the area where the body was discovered.
Because I-75 runs from Naples all the way to Cincinnati, we could have anybody coming up and down that road at any point in time that could have done this. We know that there's serial killers that operate throughout the United States at all times. So we have to look at every person that's imaginable.
After consulting a database of killers known to have operated in the region, Detective DeCero focuses in on a possible suspect.
We dealt with a person called Keith Jesperson, who killed several women. He was currently incarcerated in the state of Washington. But he admitted to killing a woman in the state of Florida. So we knew he had been in Florida at some time. Any new lead that comes in like that, where you have a known killer who's admitting to killing someone in the state of Florida, it would pique our interest. Keith Jesperson was a very large man, and he's called the happy face killer. Because he liked to make the little smiley face on people after he killed them. But he would kill a lot of people by asphyxiation. He would pick up girls at truck stops and things of that nature and choke them out.
Detectives examine the items recovered with the bones for any link to Jesperson.
A shirt was found in the area of the neck, where the neck would have been during life. Its physical location told you a lot about what happened just prior to death.
The shirt that was tied around the neck that had been tied into a big knot, was it strangulation? Some type of airflow cutoff, some type of asphyxiation?
Even though he's behind bars, Keith Jesperson, the happy-face killer, could be a lead suspect.
He was a truck driver, so it would have been easy for him to pull off the side of the road and dispose of her.
Most serial killers don't change their MO. The reason is that they're staying within their comfort zone. They're using the same tactics to lure the women into their trap. They're using the same weapons to kill them. And they're using the same methods of disposal of the body.
Detectives know Jesperson killed his victims through strangulation, so they turn to Dr. Falsetti to determine how Jane Doe I-275 died.
The skull told us about the injuries that she suffered at or around the time of death. We took the skull and x-rayed it, and under x-ray, we could actually see lead debris. There is evidence of 2 gunshot wounds to the back of the skull, fractures radiated out from them in what we call a stellate pattern or star pattern. So in this case, her cause of death was gunshot wound to the head.
The bullet wound did not fit with Keith Jesperson because was not his MO. We pulled his trucking records, we pulled his weight logs, and we pulled his cell phone. And we kind of saw where he was. His timeline didn't fit ours. At this point in time, we're still looking to see who could be our killer. Is it someone that picked this girl up somewhere, had a dispute with her? Or was it a boyfriend-girlfriend situation where they were into something they shouldn't have been into? We really don't know. In a cold case, you kind of always hit dead ends. You go through 50 reports, you might get one possibility. You start to look at more and more aspects of what else could it be.
Detective DeCero scours the items recovered from the crime scene in search of new clues. He finds an unlikely thread to follow.
As we're starting to look a little bit more, we find the breast implant. Even though it's the side of the interstate, not many people are throwing breast implants out the side of the car window. Breast implants actually have serial numbers on them and can be traced back through the manufacturer, then back to where they were sent to. It links back to the doctor in Maitland, Florida, which is over by Orlando. He opens his file up and we actually see a picture of Jane Doe prior to the breast implants, and all of her information is listed in the report. Next, we have to confirm the ID. We're able to get some dental records. And we're able to get a confirmation positive that it's Cheryl Comesso.
After more than a year of searching, Jane Doe I-275 finally has a name.
We go to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, and there we find the missing person report of Cheryl Comesso. We're positive that it's her based on all of this information. When we speak to the family, they were heartbroken. They were upset. They were besides themselves that this could happen to a member of their family. So you do everything in your power to make that family whole. Cheryl Comesso is a young lady from Brandon, Florida. She had been an exotic dancer, several different locations.
The last club that Cheryl worked at was called Mons Venus. Detectives track down and interview the employees who worked there when she did.
She was attempting to network. She wanted to meet people so that she could climb the ladder and become a star. And that was her goal. She was an amazing dancer. It was incredible. She just needed to meet the right people, and she thought that dancing there was going to do that.
Young women who get involved in exotic dancing often have this hope that they might get discovered, that this might become a springboard into other kinds of career opportunities, including acting, including modeling, and so forth. But many discover when they get into the club that it's not what they expected. They're often exposed to people who abuse them, who harass them, and they discover very quickly that there aren't these kinds of opportunities to branch out.
Detectives suspect Cheryl was working in a dangerous environment. There's no telling who she met at the club.
The customers that come in come from all walks of life. Some are good, some are bad. Most of them have some shady background to them. You have a whole pool of nefarious people to deal with in these strip joints.
Investigators focus on the Mons Venus Strip Club, searching for a break in the murder of Cheryl Comesso. After hours of interviews, one name keeps coming up.
We find out that no one in the entire place liked Franklin Floyd. He's been a career criminal for 50 years. So he keeps going back into jail, learning new things, coming back out, learning new things, coming back out.
Floyd is the stepfather of one of the dancers, Sharon. He spends a lot of time around the club.
People thought it was odd that you would go watch your daughter dance in a topless facility.
Floyd's disturbing behavior is confirmed by a friend of Cheryl and Sharon.
He drove us to a party, and he reached over and he pinched his daughter's nipple. And he said, "She has a nice ass." I was shocked and appalled and disgusted. And he had a conversation with me regarding some BDSM activities. I was so frightened because he was speaking about sexual torture, and it seemed like a switch in him flipped.
The stories raise red flags for the investigators. They take a hard look at Floyd and his daughter Sharon.
We had interviews with people that knew Sharon. We find out quite a bit.
Sharon admitted to me Floyd been abusing her whole life. I told her we needed to find a way to get her out of there and away from him, and she never thought for 1 second she could get away alive.
It's clear to police that Floyd is a violent man, one with dark secrets.
Sharon talked to a friend saying that she knew something so bad that could put Franklin away forever.
But whatever Sharon knew, she was never able to reveal.
In 1990, she was run over walking on the interstate at 3 o'clock in the morning. She was probably more like run over by Floyd, would be my guess. He thought, "You're not going to turn me in for anything."
Sharon's death is ruled a hit and run, but the connection to Floyd is suspicious. Another witness at the club tells them that Floyd was also violent with Cheryl.
One of the dancers observed a physical altercation between the two of them, where Cheryl allegedly said, "I've got enough on you now that you're going to jail." We know there was a physical altercation after that. I think that the whole aspect of it was she challenged him. Floyd does not like to be challenged. So he figures, this is one I can't control. She's not scared of me. She's not intimidated by me. So the only way to do it is I'm going to have to do something so drastic.
Franklin Floyd has a disturbing reputation at the club, but detectives need more to connect him to Cheryl's murder. It's a lead from the FBI, that changes everything.
Unbeknownst to us, the FBI is working a kidnapping in Oklahoma. The person who committed the kidnapping is Franklin Floyd.
Floyd is captured and held in jail. When the truck Floyd used for the crime is searched, the FBI finds some shocking material.
There are various pictures of the woman at different stages. Obviously not stages that she was enjoying. This is some type of trauma being done to her. One of these pictures is a picture of a young, dark-haired woman who's being choked out.
Detective DeCero obtains the violent pornographic images from the FBI.
She's in distress. She's obviously been beaten. She's got a large hematoma under her eye. Whoever did this had a very sadistic streak.
Police believe the woman in the photos is Cheryl Camesso, but she has been beaten so badly, Detective DeCero can't be sure.
When you have photographs of a living person with injuries, it would be possible to use those photographs to make a comparison with the remains that you have and those injuries that are present.
The forensic team examines the photographs in the hope they can make an identification.
So what they had was these well-documented photographs of the injury to the face. They then did an anatomical comparison. This underlying fracture is here. This injury is on the same cheekbone here. And this allowed them to tie the injuries together. And the person in the photograph was identified as Cheryl Ann Camesso.
Investigators have further evidence connecting Franklin Floyd to Cheryl Camesso, but it isn't enough to prove he's the one responsible for her brutal homicide. Detective DeCero wants to confront him about his involvement.
Before we went out and interviewed Franklin Floyd, we talked to the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI, and they were very informative. What they said was, if you want to get anything from this man, before you can ask him any questions, just let him talk. So when we went out there, he probably talked for about 3.5, 4 hours straight. Then we start sliding in simple little questions to him, little ones that he can't deny, like, do you know Cheryl Camesso? Never heard of her. Here's her picture. Have you ever seen her? And then Franklin put his thumb on the picture and held it up and got, yeah, I think I might remember her.
The net around Franklin Floyd is tightening.
We went back the next day and talked to him again. First thing he wanted to do was receive the picture. And he's holding the picture up, and what he's doing is he's looking for his thumbprint.
Investigators are closing in on Franklin Floyd for the murder of Cheryl Camesso. They challenge him about his connection to her death.
He went into another tirade. He denies. He made statements about you don't have any bodies. You don't have any way to prove it. He's a sociopath. He's very plotting. I think we've only hit the tip of the iceberg.
While the photos are brutal, they do not prove that Floyd killed Cheryl. Floyd could claim he got them from someone else, or that they were taken years earlier. Detectives turn to Dr. Falsetti in order to determine when the injuries were inflicted. They need to know where the torture fits within the timeline of Cheryl's death.
We look at fractures or damage to bone, and we try and determine what the category is. Antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem. An antemortem injury is one that's healed. Perimortem is anything that occurred at or around the time of death.
So if something happens to the victim's bones at or around the time of death, that's not going to change. That's going to be a permanent record.
Cheryl's injuries are considered to be perimortem. There's no sign of healing. The cheekbone inbended, which it does when it's viable. There was also an injury to rib that was also considered perimortem in nature. The facial fractures and the gunshot wound would have occurred in a relatively close period of time, a couple of days, if not hours.
These findings prove that the photographs depict Cheryl's final moments. Now, police need to prove that Floyd was there when they were taken.
The important thing is the pictures of Cheryl Comesso when she's being beaten. There are obvious signs that you can identify in there. The couch, the paneling, and say that is definitely a trailer.
Detectives get an address from the staff at Mom's Venus for a trailer park listed as Sharon and Floyd's residence. Police want to see if the photos were taken where Floyd lived.
Finding a location where the victim was killed is often a turning point in an ongoing investigation. It opens up a new realm of possibilities for investigators who can now find additional clues to solve the case.
But when police arrive at the park, they get a big surprise.
Somehow there was a mysterious fire in the trailer, which burns the trailer down to the ground.
But DeCiro discovers someone who knew Sharon and Floyd when they lived in the park.
We found a woman who lives in the trailer park. One Floyd and Sharon lived there. She identified the couch and the paneling from the picture.
There's no doubt Cheryl's photos were taken in Floyd's trailer. Every sign points to Floyd as Cheryl's killer. But investigators hit another roadblock.
We have a suspect, we have a lot of evidence that places the suspect in a relationship with the victim, but the postmortem interval, as currently calculated, excludes him because he was in prison during this period of time.
If Cheryl was killed between 1990 and 1992, as originally calculated, Floyd couldn't have done it.
Franklin Floyd wasn't in jail at the time. Plain and simple.
Detectives decide to review the original timing of Cheryl's death.
We go back to Dr. Falsetti and say, based on what you're seeing, could the timeline have been a little bit longer?
So I studied the environmental area, went back over the case notes, and the botanical material that was cut and preserved. This botanical material was covering or growing through the bones.
The vegetation on Cheryl's remains gives Dr. Falsetti a new plan for determining when she was killed.
The idea that I had was, well, maybe we could use the plants to determine the time of death. I had met Dr. David Hall, who is a botanist at the University of Florida.
Well, my background is basically all of botany. The things that a botanist can do for you most commonly are destroy an alibi, put someone or something somewhere based on plants, and determine time since death.
Dr. Hall examines the plants found among Cheryl's remains to make his own assessment about her time of death.
I found 3 plants that I could use from my pelvis, and one that I could use that was growing under a leg bone. In the temperate world, you can count the rings that tree gets. And if the tree is through a skeleton, you know that it's been there at least that long. I take a very sharp knife and cut through the branches as clean as I can. There were 3 clear rings, so they were 3 years old.
Cheryl's body is discovered in 1995, so 3-year-old plants appear to place the crime in 1992, as originally estimated. But there's more for Dr. Hall to calculate.
Body fluids are caustic. They don't help a plant at all. They usually destroy plant growth underneath. So after the remains were completely deteriorated and there was just bone left, then these branches grew through the hip bone, grew through the pelvis. And I asked two medical examiners who had worked in that area for many decades about how long it would take a body to deteriorate. It's almost 4 years. It would take a while for the branch to get there.
When body decomposition is factored in, the time of Cheryl's murder changes.
This is not a year growth. This is not a 5-year growth. This is a 6 to 7 year growth minimum. It's another piece of science that goes with what we believe, goes along with the statements, goes along with all the physical evidence that we have. No matter what Floyd says, we can disprove it.
Investigators have nearly all the evidence they need to close the book on Franklin Floyd for the murder of Cheryl Camesso.
We explained to Floyd, you did the murder in 1989. He then goes off the deep end saying how we planted evidence, how the pictures weren't his, they were planted.
Floyd also denies a connection to the trailer.
Floyd says, could be anybody's trailer. I could have let my trailer out to someone and you can't prove it was me.
The biggest challenge when investigators think they have their person, but they don't have any physical evidence linking that person to the crime, is that they know this case might not hold up in court. Oftentimes, jurors will want to see something more concrete that links that person to the crime.
You gotta remember, he's been a career criminal for 50 years. So he's obviously not afraid of the system. And he knows if he manipulates the system the way he wants to, he can get through it.
If police can't prove he took the photos of Cheryl, Floyd could end up free.
He is a killer. He's that type of person. I don't want to ever see him out on the street.
Detective DeSero goes back to the photos of Cheryl provided by the FBI, searching for anything that could prove Floyd is the photographer.
You can actually see a hand on her buttocks when somebody's taking the picture. The number of wrinkles that are in your thumb, that's unique to each individual, much like a fingerprint.
The case against Floyd now rests on matching thumbs.
The knuckle fold is a double-edged sword because if we couldn't prove it was him, then that would give him a defense. If we could prove it was him, that takes away all defense. They took a secondary picture of Floyd's thumb and compared it to the picture with his hand on the buttocks and said, that's definitely Franklin Floyd's thumb.
The scientific evidence tells us, and the identity of the individual, which is Franklin Floyd, this affirms the story that the prosecution will tell, and it gives the jury something tangible which to base their opinions on.
Franklin Floyd is put on trial for Cheryl's murder.
Sitting on the witness stand, looking at the pictures of Cheryl beaten, tortured, these dirty, exploitive pictures. It was so heart-wrenching.
The mystery that the science was able to resolve was who was this person who was found by I-275? The other question, what were the circumstances of her winding up by the side of the road? It is the communication between law enforcement and the scientists that eventually answered those two simple and incredibly complicated questions.
The scientific evidence at trial is great because it allows the jury to understand. It's backed up. It's not conjecture. It's right out there as a undeniable truth.
Floyd is convicted of killing Cheryl Camesso and is sentenced to death.
Cheryl's family, they were very happy. They felt that there was justice done. Cheryl never got a chance to grow. She was a young lady feeling her way in the world, and he ended that. A lot of times when you work something that's heinous or awful or something that you just can't make sense of, it makes it worth it because you know that you made a difference in some lives. It's rewarding.